There are moments when a single word can expose more truth than an hour-long argument ever could. A person can hide behind charm, confidence, success, intelligence, and even kindness. But when someone looks directly at them and calls them a monster, the real question is not, why did she say that? The real question is, what did she see that made her feel that way? Because psychologically, people rarely use a word that powerful without an emotional reason behind it. Sometimes monster is not about appearance. It is about behavior. It is about what happens when the mask disappears, when patience runs out, when control becomes more important than connection, and when another person's emotions stop being treated as feelings and start being treated as weaknesses. And that is where psychology becomes uncomfortable, because the most dangerous people are not always the loudest people in the room. Sometimes they are calm, sometimes they are charming, sometimes everyone around them thinks they are wonderful. The person who experiences their darker side may be the only one who knows what exists underneath the surface. When someone calls another person a monster directly to their face, there is usually an emotional history behind those words. It can represent fear, disappointment, anger, betrayal, or the realization that the person standing in front of them is completely different from the person they believed they knew. Imagine trusting someone deeply and slowly discovering that every beautiful quality you admired comes with another side. The confidence becomes arrogance, the protectiveness becomes control, the passion becomes obsession, the attention becomes surveillance, the certainty becomes intimidation, and suddenly what once looked attractive begins to feel threatening. This transformation is psychologically powerful because attraction and fear can sometimes exist surprisingly close together. The same intensity that initially makes someone fascinating can later become the very thing that makes them emotionally exhausting. A person who has been pushed too far may eventually stop explaining themselves. They stop defending every emotion. They stop asking to be understood. Instead, they say something brutally simple: "I know what you are." That sentence can be more powerful than an argument because it communicates that the illusion is gone. There is no longer a desire to convince the other person to change. There is simply recognition. And recognition can be terrifying for someone who has built their identity around controlling how others perceive them. People who depend heavily on their image often become extremely uncomfortable when somebody sees beyond it. They can handle criticism from strangers because strangers do not truly know them. But criticism from someone who has witnessed their private behavior can feel completely different. It threatens the story they have created about themselves. This is why the word monster can psychologically trigger such a strong reaction. It attacks more than behavior, it attacks identity. If someone believes they are the good person, the strong person, the intelligent person, the person who always knows better, then being confronted with the possibility that their behavior has become cruel can create an enormous internal conflict. Instead of asking, "Did I hurt someone?" they may immediately ask, "How dare you describe me this way?" Notice the difference. One question focuses on the damage, the other focuses on the insult. That difference tells you a lot about emotional maturity. A psychologically mature person may still become defensive, but eventually they can step back and examine their behavior. An emotionally immature person may become obsessed with punishing the person who exposed it. And this is where silence becomes powerful. Not manipulative silence, not silent treatment designed to create anxiety. I mean the silence that comes after someone has finally understood what they are dealing with. There is a difference between silence used as a weapon and silence created by emotional exhaustion. When someone has explained the same boundary repeatedly, expressed the same pain repeatedly, and watched the same behavior repeat again and again, eventually words lose their power. They do not become quiet because they have nothing to say. They become quiet because they have already said everything that mattered. That kind of silence can be misunderstood. The other person may think they don't care anymore, but sometimes the opposite is true. They cared so much that they reached the end of their emotional capacity. They invested so much energy trying to make the relationship work that eventually they realized they could not carry the entire emotional weight alone. And when that realization arrives, something changes internally. They stop trying to rescue the relationship. They stop trying to decode every message. They stop analyzing every mood. They stop asking why the person behaves the way they do. They begin asking a much more important question. Why am I allowing this behavior into my life? That is one of the strongest psychological shifts a person can make, because you cannot always control another person's personality, but you can control your proximity to their behavior. You cannot force someone to become emotionally healthy. You cannot make someone respect a boundary they have no intention of respecting. You cannot love someone into becoming accountable, and you cannot explain your worth to someone who benefits from making you question it. This is why labeling someone a monster should not automatically be interpreted literally. Psychology requires context. Sometimes people use extreme language during intense emotional conflict. Sometimes the word reflects genuine emotional harm. Sometimes it reflects anger rather than objective reality. The important thing is not the label itself. The important thing is the behavior underneath the label. What happened? What patterns repeated? Were boundaries ignored? Was fear created intentionally? Was vulnerability used against someone? Were apologies followed by genuine change, or simply followed by another cycle of the same behavior? Because patterns reveal more than promises. Anyone can apologize, anyone can cry, anyone can promise to change. Anyone can become extremely emotional when they realize they are losing access to someone. But consistency is where character becomes visible. If someone hurts you and then changes their behavior, that tells you something. If they hurt you, apologize, behave well temporarily, and then repeat the exact same behavior, that tells you something else. The psychology of relationships is not about judging people after one bad moment. It is about observing patterns over time. And patterns are difficult to fake forever. A person can maintain an image for weeks, months, sometimes even years, but sustained closeness creates opportunities for contradictions to appear. You begin seeing how they react when they are frustrated, how they respond when they are told no, how they treat people who cannot benefit them, how they behave when they lose control of a situation, how they respond when someone else succeeds, how they handle criticism, how they behave when they are jealous, how they treat vulnerability, how they react when you establish independence. Those moments reveal much more than romantic words ever will. One of the biggest psychological mistakes people make is judging someone's character by how they treat them when everything is going their way. Of course, someone can be loving when they are getting what they want. The deeper test comes when they are disappointed, when you disagree, when you say no, when you need space, when you become independent, when you stop giving them constant reassurance, when you refuse to participate in an unhealthy pattern. That is when emotional regulation becomes visible. A healthy person can experience rejection without turning it into revenge. A healthy person can experience disagreement without turning it into humiliation. A healthy person can experience jealousy without trying to control another person's freedom. A healthy person can hear no without interpreting it as disrespect. And a healthy person can be confronted without immediately needing to destroy the person who confronted them. That last point is particularly important because if someone calls you out and your immediate response is to attack their character, you may be avoiding the actual issue. Instead of examining the behavior, you attack the person who noticed it. Instead of asking what happened, you ask who gave them permission to say it. Instead of taking responsibility, you search for a way to make them feel guilty for speaking. This is one of the oldest psychological defense mechanisms, shifting attention away from the behavior and toward the person describing the behavior. But once you understand that mechanism, you become harder to manipulate. You start listening differently. You stop asking only, "What are they saying?" You start asking, "Why are they saying it?" You stop focusing only on the argument. You start observing the pattern. You stop being hypnotized by emotional intensity. You start looking for consistency. And that is when emotional intelligence becomes stronger. There is another fascinating psychological element here. Sometimes people become more aggressive when they realize they are losing psychological control over someone. Not necessarily physical control, but emotional influence. If someone was used to receiving immediate responses, constant attention, endless explanations, or emotional reassurance, and suddenly that access disappears, they may feel destabilized. They may provoke arguments just to create an emotional reaction. They may say something shocking just to make the other person respond. They may criticize, accuse, or exaggerate because any reaction can feel like proof that they still have influence. But emotional freedom begins when you stop rewarding provocation with your nervous system. You do not have to attend every emotional battle you are invited to. You do not have to prove your innocence to someone committed to misunderstanding you. You do not have to keep explaining a boundary that has already been communicated clearly. And you certainly do not have to become cruel simply because someone else behaved cruelly toward you. That is another psychological trap. When someone hurts you repeatedly, there is a temptation to become just as hard as they are. You start thinking, if they can hurt me, I can hurt them. But that does not necessarily create strength. Sometimes it simply means their behavior has changed you. Real strength is different. Real strength is being able to see someone's darkness without allowing it to become your own. Real strength is being able to walk away without needing revenge. Real strength is being able to say, "What happened to me was wrong," without spending the rest of your life trying to destroy the person responsible. And real strength is understanding that forgiveness does not require access. You can forgive someone and still keep distance. You can understand someone's childhood and still reject their behavior. You can recognize someone's pain and still refuse to become the place where they deposit that pain. Compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Boundaries without compassion can become cruelty. Emotional maturity requires knowing the difference. Sometimes the person being called a monster may actually be deeply wounded themselves. That does not excuse harmful behavior, but it can explain why certain patterns exist. People often repeat what they have never learned to process. Someone who grew up around emotional chaos may believe chaos is normal. Someone who experienced conditional love may learn to control others to avoid abandonment. Someone who was constantly humiliated may become obsessed with maintaining superiority. Someone who was betrayed may develop extreme suspicion. Understanding the origin of behavior can create empathy. But understanding is not the same as permission. You can understand why a fire started without standing inside it. You can understand someone's trauma without allowing their trauma to become your trauma. You can recognize their pain without volunteering to be damaged by it. This is where many people lose themselves in relationships. They become so focused on understanding the other person's psychology that they forget to examine their own. They become therapists instead of partners. They analyze every wound, every childhood experience, every insecurity, every fear, while their own emotional needs slowly disappear. Eventually, they realize something painful. I spent so much time trying to understand why they hurt me that I forgot I was being hurt. That realization can change everything, because love is not supposed to require the destruction of your identity. Love should challenge you, yes. Love should expose your weaknesses, yes. Love should require growth, accountability, patience, and compromise. But love should not require you to constantly abandon yourself. And if someone has to become smaller, quieter, more anxious, less independent, less confident, or less authentic, just to keep another person comfortable, that is not emotional security. That is emotional captivity. The strongest people are not always the loudest people. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who finally stops participating in a cycle that has been damaging them. They do not need a dramatic exit. They do not need a final speech. They do not need everyone to understand their side. They simply make a decision, and once that decision is made internally, their behavior begins to change. They stop chasing explanations. They stop checking for reactions. They stop trying to make someone jealous. They stop posting things for attention. They stop trying to prove that they are doing better. They simply start living. That is the point where another person's opinion begins losing its power. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson hidden inside a confrontation like this. The real victory is not making someone feel guilty. The real victory is becoming psychologically independent from the person who once had the ability to control your emotional state. If their approval no longer determines your confidence, you are free. If their anger no longer determines your peace, you are free. If their silence no longer makes you panic, you are free. If their attention no longer determines your worth, you are free. And if their attempt to provoke you no longer changes your behavior, they have lost the psychological access they once had. That does not make you heartless. It means you finally understand the difference between caring about someone and being controlled by your attachment to them. So when someone looks directly at another person and calls them a monster, do not become obsessed with the word. Look beneath it. Look at the behavior. Look at the history. Look at the pattern. Look at what happened before the sentence was spoken and what happens after it. Because words can be emotional. Patterns are evidence. And ultimately, character is not revealed by what someone says about themselves. It is revealed by what they repeatedly do when they are angry, disappointed, rejected, challenged, or given power. That is where the mask becomes unnecessary. That is where psychology becomes real. And that is where you discover that sometimes the most important moment in a relationship is not when someone says, "I love you." It is when they are given the opportunity to hurt you and choose not to. Because anyone can perform affection when everything is beautiful. Character appears when things are difficult. And when you finally learn to judge people by patterns instead of promises, by consistency instead of chemistry, and by respect instead of intensity, you stop being impressed by the mask. You start paying attention to the person underneath it.